Welcome everybody. Thank you again for joining us. This is Happy Hour. Randall Cass is doing a presentation tonight, so he unfortunately can't be here. Normally the Happy Hour is hosted by Randall Cass from Iowa State University and Judy Wu Smart, myself from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We also have several University of Lincoln B-Lab folks like Luke Norris and who else is on the line? I can't see the crowd.
Sheldon's with us.
And Sheldon Brummel, so coordinator of GPMB program. You'll sometimes see some of our undergrad students and other folks that are associated. So Happy Hour has moved from being completely under Iowa State and University of Nebraska into the umbrella of the Great Plains Master Beekeeping Training Program. So every time we meet, we're going to try to get someone else who is part of the governing committee or a member of a subcommittee or somebody who is participating in our group to help host this Q&A session, because then we can get a little bit more involvement, a little bit more participation from other people, other experiences. Today we have Megan Vetter. She's the president of the Nebraska Beekeepers Association group. And I put the link down here. We can also put it in the chat box. But just really quickly, we do have a number of partners within this training beekeeping program. We're not a bee school. We're just an organization that is trying to bring together resources that are provided from the local associations and the clubs. So our groups and our state partners include a number of people from Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri. We're starting to get people involved from Wyoming, as well as interest from Indiana and so forth. And so we just want to be a safe place for people to kind of ask questions, learn about beekeeping, learn about some of these topics that affect beekeepers in the Midwest in particular. And then we also want to be able to share new opportunities, courses, programs, I don't know, resources and other things that we're learning and wanting to kind of spread across the area. So I guess without any other further ado, I'm going to let Megan introduce herself and take over.
Thank you, Judy. Hi, everybody. Happy Hour. I can't even say it now. Happy Hour. Cheers. Thanks for coming on tonight. And tonight we're going to talk about feeding your bees in the winter. We're also going to talk about some of the signs of dead bee hives and the necrosis that happens, some of the reasons why bees are dying in the winter time. And it's a pleasure to share with you tonight what I've done for my beehives, and I'm going to share some slides that were put together by the UNL students on winter colony management. So I will start with sharing my screen with what has worked for me and what has hopefully you can identify with some of the practices that I have put together, and we will move on to the UNL slides. Judy has some information to share as well, and I think some of our students from the UNL B-Lab will also be able to chime in. We welcome any questions in the chat, and we'll be able to address those as we go along. We're there at the end, so enjoy, and please, if you have any questions, just let us know and we'll be happy to answer. Now I got to find my slide. Oh, and slideshow. Oh, I'm going too fast. Okay, here we are. All right, I will start with winter feeding. This is a crucial time for your bees here in the late winter. We have had some unseasonably warm weather this year for January and February. And looking at the forecast, I'm seeing a lot of opportunities to go and check on the bees and see what their honey stores are looking like and what their winter progress has been. So during these warm weather days that we're having here in Nebraska, your bees will be breaking cluster and moving about the hive and consuming more honey, and they can eat up much of their 90 to 100 pounds of honey that they need to survive the winter. Normally in a winter of Nebraska, your hive is going to be clustering and moving slowly throughout the hive vertically. And when we get these 50, 60-degree days, they are breaking that cluster and they're moving about and consuming more honey because they're flying more. They are exiting the hive, and they are also in search of any pollen or reserves that can be found outside of the hive. So when you are going into winter, adding candy boards, fondant, or dry sugar in any kind of emergency will help to keep your bees fed in these late winter warm days. I will say that it's not recommended. Do not feed your bees organic sugar, brown sugar, or powdered sugar. Just plain white sugar is ideal. So this is a hive of mine. I added a little bit of supplement just kind of there at the top of my frames. I added a sugar fondant and an extra sugar and shortening patty for insurance. I did this in early December because my hives were out foraging after I took the honey off of them in early September. Actually, it was early August. I took the honey off of the hives, treated for mites. And after that, I let them forage more to build up some more of that natural nectar into their honey stores, and then fed them the liquid syrup until the nights got too cold for that to be taken in. And so I didn't think that my hives had enough going into winter. And so I supplemented with some of these sugar patties, and I used this grease, a shortening, like Crisco shortening and sugar mixture for insurance, and also to help resist the tracheal mite that can become a problem in their winter cluster. So with the warm winter weather, they ate through all of their honey and they started consuming this sugar. This is a hive that just last week, well, it was late January. I think it was about the 31st that I went out and observed one of my hives in the yard. I'll play this video for you. And I do welcome any comments. If you have a hive like this in your yard, this is the only hive that was acting like this. She's my diva, I believe. And very active. At this point, I was certain that I probably had run out of stores and these bees needed attention. I had fed them dry sugar in mid-January, and I thought that it was time to add more. Okay, so this was I think I just did this yesterday. I think it was about 62 or 3 degrees here yesterday. You can see that I've got a lot of bees up on the top of those frames. And I think that this hive is pretty full already, but they had worked through the sugar patty fondant that I put on. They worked through the grease patty I'd put on, and they'd worked through a newspaper with dry sugar supplement that I had done in mid-January. I gently smoked them and they moved down so that I could apply the paper and then slowly pour on the sugar, so I wasn't crushing anyone and aggravating them. But you can see I've got my bag of pure cane sugar there, and that was a 4-pound bag. I used about, I think I had a half of that left, so I used another half, about a pound of sugar that I put on that hive. And they were active again after when I came out there. They were very rambunctious. They were not stinging, but they were just very, a lot of them flying outside of the hive. Once they got that sugar on, I shut them up and they were much calmer for the rest of the time that I was out there. Dry sugar is okay for bees to consume because the condensation that they create, air conditioning their hive, will soften that sugar and they can consume that. This is a late winter hive. So this is from, I think, last year or 2 years ago, maybe. No, this is last spring. A picture I took, I was doing a check because it was 60 degrees and I needed to see how they were doing honey stores and where the brood chamber was within the hive, where the brood was being reared. Mid-March, I saw that there were honey stores still present. So during the winter, I don't ever, from November, December, January, and February, I never pull out any frames for fear of cooling or chilling any of the bees too much. So I wait until March when I know that I've got a few days that are above 50 degrees, and I can manipulate this hive and pull these frames without really disturbing their core temperature too much. They can recover from that quickly. So there is some dry sugar on there, and I had some pollen supplement as well. And when it looks like this, you know there's still honey stores in there. If there are, is there nectar being created? Are there dandelions out? Are the apples and the plum thickets in bloom? It is probably safe to remove that extra sugar. They will remove it on their own, but you can just help them with that process by taking that extra sugar off. This is my sugar and grease patty formula. I picked it up off online. Oops, sorry. Here we go. These tracheal mites, which are only diagnosed with a high-powered microscope, but they do live within the hive, and they can affect the breathing of the bee, which in turn reduces their muscle or weakens their muscle contractions while they are trying to warm the hive. So I use a 4-pound bag of cane sugar, 3 cups of solid Crisco. You can put in a cup honey if you'd like to. I did not, but that is part of the recipe. It kind of draws them more to the mixture if you'd like to. Please only use the honey that you removed from the hive and not any store-bought honey. It can be crystallized honey that you have around. Mix well and form into 1-pound patties. You can freeze these and they'll be good to just let them warm on the counter before you take them out to the hives. You really don't want to put anything freezing onto the top of the hive frame. Place on the top bars of your hive without blocking your ventilation. This should last a couple of months. And I can say that some of my hives ate it all right away. And then some of the hives that I have did not, that barely touched it. So it really is, depends on your hive personality. I think each one of my hives has their own personality. So that's my personal story, what I've been sharing in my apiary. I have 6 hives. I have 6 living hives currently. It's February 8th, and it was probably 55 degrees today. So I know that in the next week, I'm going to have to go back out there and do another dry sugar combination. And at that point, I believe I'm going to put on some a pollen patty mixture to help them start their brood rearing. I just feel like, looking at as a beekeeper, I think I'm also a meteorologist in a way, because I try to not predict the weather, but just pay close attention to what's going on in the sky and the air around me, so that I can better predict how to feed and care for my bees.
Thanks, Megan.
There was a question in the chat box regarding, well, you kind of answered that regarding your ratios and your recipes and providing that. Have you heard of any of using shortening?
Shortening is the Crisco. So when you buy Crisco in the tub, like for making
Pies.
Pie crust. Pies, yes. It's not vegetable oil, it's the grease. It's the solid grease. So you don't want to mix the two. You want to use the sugar and the grease. That keeps it in that more firm, solid form.
And I made a comment about the tracheal mites, because we haven't, luckily we haven't had too much of an issue with tracheal mites for a number of years since they introduced essential oil-based varroa treatments, like your menthol, eucalyptus oils. And but there was a murmur, there was a whisper that there was a inspector in Tennessee that had found tracheal mites in an inspection. But since then, people have been looking, and I don't think it's as widespread. It's really hard to find now, because everybody's using more of the natural based volatile type varroas treatments.
Yes, I agree. I use thymol based mite treatments, and I still can smell that, even though the treatments are off of the hive. I can still smell it when I open it up or when I'm near the hive. So yes, it does definitely hang around. And I've seen recipes with this sugar and grease patty mixture where you can add in thyme essential oils, wintergreen essential oil, to help with that as an insurance for mites as well, the varroa mite. So, let's see. Would you like me to share the, where's it at?
Do we have any other questions, comments? With dry sugar, do you have any problems with dysentery or I know that some people might have some issues with water imbalance issues, but it depends on where you are and how much moisture. Some people have a real problem with too much moisture or too little moisture.
I haven't seen anything like that this year. We do have a water source, a pond that's nearby. And so we, of course, here in Nebraska, we have, well, where we're at, we have not had enough snowfall. So there is that moisture deficiency that we have. But for my personal hives, we do have a pond for them to go and take water, and just the condensation that they create on their own can help hydrate that sugar so it is palatable for them. whatever newsprint is left over has a coating of wax on it, which I think is pretty interesting that they move across that and so much that their wax glands are kind of transferring to that newsprint, because I pull it out and it doesn't shred. It's like pretty stiff where they haven't chewed through it to access that sugar. And as far as dysentery, your brown sugar and your organic sugar will cause that gut bacteria to be aggravated, where they will have loose stools, and and powdered sugar is mixed with a cornstarch as well, so that is not beneficial for their gut bacteria either.
So unless there's other questions, I have another question. Do you think that the bees that are really active in that big colony, are they brooding? Yeah, I mean, we've had a pretty warm winter. It looked like they were doing orientation flights. Are they brooding and doing orientation flights?
Well, see, I'd like to, I really try to wait till the forecast is above 60 before I go in there and pull any frames out to see what's going on. But it's just that one hive that acts like that. So it's like, is she just my diva? Is she just so, because none of my other hives have that much energy to be out and in that foraging orientation behavior. And I don't think it's robbing, because
no, they didn't look like they were going anywhere.
Yeah, I don't see it happening on any of the other hives. So,
well, it's interesting because we've had that happen with big colonies in our operations, where it looked like they eat themselves out of house and home because they continue to brood and never really stop or slow down. And I'm wondering if from your efforts of maintaining and feeding, you've saved it, just how it could just be she's just a rambunctious egg-laying monster.
Yeah, she could be. And so in the next couple of days, when we get this, the next heat wave, I'm going to check out, I'm going to go in there and check it out. I likely, I would probably just flip the bottom, bring the bottom box up.
Reverse it.
Yeah.
Check for mites too.
Yeah.
Megan, you're muted.
Sorry, I had a friend stop by with Hertz Donuts. So I'm excited about those. Yeah, so I think if it works, do you recommend that if I've got a gal, a queen who's ready to bust out, that I go ahead and bring my bottom box up and give her more space to lay?
Do you know if the bottom box is full or it's empty and they've already gone through resources?
I assume it's empty because there's not a lot of traffic there at the bottom. All the traffic is at the top. So, and in past years, everybody's just kind of abandoned that bottom box. There's always a lot of pollen down there, but they're really congested in the top boxes.
Yeah, reverse it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've never done a February reverse, but
it's been really warm.
It has. It's incredible. I could share our overwintering basics with everyone. And this is the slides from the GPMB if you would like.
Is this overwintering basics recommendations for overwintering? Because if they haven't done some of these, it's a bit too late.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, yeah, winter prep. Well, we do have some, the sugar board demo video we could
Yeah,
share.
maybe what we could do is put this, the link of the sugar boards on the chat box. Do we have photos? If there are folks interested in the sugar board, that's the method Luke uses for feeding our hives right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that would be great because it's not something that I've ever attempted because I'm afraid of pouring molten hot wax or molten hot sugar everywhere, and I just don't have the woodenware resources to take care of that. So a lot of my sugar feeding has been the dry sugar. I have attempted I think the formula is 1 pound of sugar and 1 tablespoon of water mixture that you put together, and you can place that on paper plates within your hive. But Luke, if you have a link for a video, or if you want to share.
Yeah, let me first add to the chat. So on the Great Plains Master Beekeeping website, we have in the facts, it's about if you select where it says when should I feed my bees, that's where it has the information on the how to make the candy boards. And so that's the resource that would be available for that. But yeah, let me find this video here. Give me just a second and I can link it. Did you want me to share the video to view or just put it in the chat?
Let's go ahead and share it to view. I got to go throw the pasta in the pot. So I'm listening.
Oh, well, Megan, I can, well, if people want, I can start talking about the troubleshooting your hive issues.
Okay.
If people want to watch the video, because it's a video based, they can do it kind of like on their own. But let me go through while you're doing the pasta. I'll start going through necropsies. It's like 10 slides, and then we can come back and meet back.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Thanks, Judy. Thanks so much.
Okay. So I know that it's super warm right now. A lot of people are starting to take this opportunity to go out and check their hives. And so this is a perfect time to remind people to basically don't get discouraged if you have some die-outs. A lot of people want to know why their bees have died. So in order to really figure out the problems with our operations or our practices, we have to kind of diagnose the ugly parts of the beekeeping, which means slow down and don't clean up too fast. That's a lot of times our first instincts is that we see a dead out, we, rip it apart and clean off the bottom board and just kind of destroy the entire thing because we really kind of want to get it out of our mind. But we do want to take that opportunity, take some photos, take some opportunity to think about what it looked like going into the fall and how it died. And so 3 really important things to consider are your food stores, your mite loads, and the worker population. So there's just a few slides that I go through in kind of other discussions and beekeeping classes on how to troubleshoot some of these dead outs. And really you want to start with outside the hive. Are you seeing signs of dead bees? Are they live? Are there dying clusters of bees at the entrance? Do you see signs of robbing activity from the fall? Do you see signs of fecal matter, dysentery, nosema, possibly water imbalance? So take a look and see what you see before you open up the hive. And then a lot of times in the fall, the colonies, what we just talked about with Megan, there's brood in the fall and there's a lot of empty cells, especially if they're overwintering or they're going into the fall with a lot of brood. That brood has to emerge, but there's not enough time for the bees to put in honey stores and cure that honey. So what happens is those bees sometimes end up clustering on kind of empty cells. So you really do want to make sure you get feed on early and make sure that they have time. If they don't have time, move those empty frames out and replace it with food stores. looking for signs of starvation will give you kind of an indication of whether or not they truly did die in the center of the hive with very little food stores, and maybe you need to shift the food around in the fall, or are they shifted to the side or to an area where there is plenty of food and they might have died for a different reason. So signs of starvation are when the abdomens are sticking up, but a lot of times we get these situations where the colonies, you pull out the frame and some of the abdomens are in, but some aren't. You have this perfect example here where you have a lot of bees. Some look like they obviously starved, but a bunch of them look like they just died. You really want to ask yourself, where is that cluster? Notice how small that cluster is and how it's kind of conked to the side there. So try to look and see if you can determine how big is that cluster? Was it big enough to sustain heat necessary to kind of keep those bees alive? Are there multiple clusters? Where are those clusters of dead bees? And what was it on? Were they on the food frame, on food resources, or were they on empty comb right next to food sources? Because they could die if it's very cold, very close to food stores, but not able to break that cluster to reach that. So in the winter, a lot of times we see these bees, going into winter, you want your bees to be on honey stores. And what your hope is that what the hope that they're doing now is slowly working their way up, like Megan's colony, empty stores down below, working with the honey stores up above. You can do a reversal and they'd be doing really great. But sometimes you see dead colonies with plenty of stores, but they just don't seem to make it. And so why it's important to kind of diagnose these colonies is that there are these situations where we have to figure out whether or not it's something that we're mismanaging in terms of our varroa populations, or is it something that they're not getting enough food stores. These are both things that are directly related to management, which we can fix. We can try to fix it if we know what's wrong. So when we're looking at something like this, you've got a tiny cluster, food stores, a little bit of brood. I think what's happening, and Megan mentioned it before, is we have these wild ups and downs. When the temperature drops in the winter, the bees cluster together, then we have a warming like we're having right now. The bees uncluster and they kind of spread out, they kind of move about the hive. Then you have a sudden drop in temperature and they have to recluster. I think that a lot of these bees aren't making it back to the main cluster like they should. Some of them are maybe creating these little satellite clusters that just, they group together, but it just happens to be a little bit further away from the main hive. If it gets cold enough, they'll die off in that tiny little cluster. And some of them will fall to the ground or some of them will stay on the frame. Then you have a warming and they uncluster, then you have a drop, then they cluster, and so you can see so forth and so forth. You can have these situations where the extreme weather patterns could be killing off small cohorts of your bees. And you really, this is just a hypothesis. We have to look at what's going on with the colony to really assess that. Why I suspect that is that I do oftentimes see distinct clusters of dead bees in these dead outs. I often see these tiny, tiny groupings that are separate from the main hive. Sometimes I see them on a comb with pollen, but it probably died because it just couldn't maintain heat because these bees are separated by the frame. So they're on either side of the frame. They just couldn't maintain enough heat. Right here is a great picture of that. You've got the big piece of wood separating the two clusters. They're not large enough to retain the heat separated by that wood frame. And so they're just not at that population threshold necessary. I think that people oftentimes forget that here's a great example. The microcluster is found away from the main cluster. How can you tell? I'm going to open this up to anybody in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself. Here's a picture. You opened up the hive, and Judy says that this is a microcluster that is not associated with the main cluster. How do I know? Am I just guessing? Am I full of it?
I think I may. Judy, would it be where most of the bees on the bottom board or in one corner, and then the ones that are on the frames are on the other?
Yep. Yeah. So this colony is, these cluster of bees are over here. There's a huge pile of bees over here. This is where the main cluster died out. This was an earlier cluster, not associated with that main cluster. So there's multiple clusters here in this colony, indicating that there might have been the separation and die-off. So definitely, absolutely look for your bottom boards for clues. Here's another example. Here's two very similar strength colonies and two very different looking bottom boards. They're both dead outs. So one of the colonies is the one we just mentioned. It had the big pile of dead bees. You can see the one on the I'm sorry, what is on my right, the big pile of dead bees, that's this one. And the side little micro cluster. You can see that if I'm opening up the frames, it looks like there are some empty combs in the middle there. You can also see that there's another colony with lots of brood. There's still a cluster of dead bees over the brood. There's a lot of kind of spotted brood patterning. And you can even see perforated cells, these little holes in the brood, which indicate that there probably was a mite problem. So here we go. We've got one colony that died of starvation, one colony that died of mites. Which do you think is which? Colony A is 12 frames of bees, 6 frames of brood. You saw the pictures of the brood. There was some evidence of the mites and everything. And then colony B had 8 frames of bees, had very little brood. Do we have any guess takers?
I think that the colony on the left could have been the starvation colony.
Starvation colonies typically starve in what?
March and like late February, March.
But what form do they take when they're in that starvation phase in the hive?
I'd say they're in clusters. The one on the right was the starvation. The other one was the mites.
Yeah. When they're starving, they're typically in some sort of ball cluster or group together, and they start to drop. So the one on the right is the one that died of starvation, but it is also the one. Which one is it? Is it the one with 12 frames of bees or the one with 8 frames of bees?
I'm guessing 12 just because it seems like there are a lot more bees there.
It does, doesn't it? It does seem like there's a lot more dead bees. And that's a really interesting thing, right? There's not a lot of dead bees on the bottom board, but there wasn't a lot of dead bees in the hive either. Does that kind of tell you something? Kind of a clue? What I think is happening, and a lot of beekeepers are kind of missing some of these things, is with mite infestations, heavy infestations in the fall. A lot of times these colonies are on their way out before the winter even comes. And so you're right. I think that the colony A is the very big one with lots of brood, because that's where your mites are going to be. You saw evidence of perforated cells and brood that never emerged. So we know that varroa was such an issue in the fall that we had fall brood that never emerged. We also know that if they had fall brood that never emerged, then the population was probably so stressed it couldn't take care of that brood, which indicates to me that this colony was probably even getting robbed out. And maybe the 12 frames of bees wasn't all their bees, but a good proportion of them were robbers, because there's no bodies there, but there were evidence of brood and not well taken care of brood. And there's also evidence of high mite loads. So I think this is important for us to learn about our colonies, because if I do see a lot of mites or a lot of brood left over in these colonies that are dead outs, then it indicates to me that I've got mites that are not being controlled, particularly in the fall time. Now, is that associated with really robust queens that are brooding through the fall? Or is there something wrong with the treatments that we're using? So those would be the next questions that I would want to investigate. This is a really nice example of a typical really big colony, 23 frames of bees, 6 frames of brood. We overwintered it in 3 deeps because it was so large. We just didn't really know what to do with it. And there's signs of dysentery. There's signs of disease or sickness. The queen in this colony is a dead queen plus a very small cluster around the middle box of the honey frame. It didn't starve, and it's likely not a weak population issue, but we do see signs of disease here. This is definitely a clear sign of mites. And the reason why I say that is I think in some other pictures, when I zoom in, you can actually see mites on the backs of these dead bees. And that's the characteristic signs of this right here. That characteristic photo that everybody looks up, this is what new beekeepers expect to see when they suspect that they have a mite infection. If they don't see that, oh, I don't have mite problems. But this is a picture of what it looks like after the colony is dead and the mites have died on the bees. So I don't think people realize that there's a lot of subtle signs for mites. The deformed wing, you'll be able to see that too in some of your dead bees. So look for signs of deformed wing. Look for signs of fecal matter. So if you turn your frame upside down and look at the roofs of those cells, look for that crusty, white, sugary debris. It looks like an abnormal, hard, crusty debris. Well, those would be Varroa feces left over. So that's another way you can see if your frame or your colony died of Varroa damage. Yep, so I just covered that. Mite on bees, mite on brood, mite feces. Here's an example of what we saw on some of that big colony. Here's mites here. Feces here. Perforated cells here. So all wonderful examples of Varroa damage. I don't remember what I said about this one. Yeah, so I think this was just a joke on taking photos. So I got an opportunity to take a lot of really great photos of mites on bees because they both held very still, and that's because they were both dead. But let's see. Other places to look for mites, look in the honey cells. So there's going to be some of that. And I think, oh, can you find the mite in this photo?
I see it.
So just take some time to look at your frames. You're not, it's not always going to be very clear where you should be looking, but it's also an opportunity to look for other things like small hive beetles. Look at your bottom board. That is the best place to start when you're trying to diagnose what happened to your colony. You're going to have lots of debris there underneath the dead bees. You might see lots and lots of mites. Hopefully you can see that from this bottom board on the right. All you have to do is kind of shift the dead bees around a little bit and the mites will kind of appear if you had a big mite problem. Okay, that's all I had. I don't know if you guys want to open it up for questions or anything like that. This is just a checklist of things that we recommend people do. when they are getting their bees out of winter. So removing wraps. We're not quite there yet because it's February and it could be another month of winter. So I would hold off on doing some of this stuff, but just keep these things in mind. I don't know, Megan, what are your thoughts? When do you remove wraps?
I usually wait until the bomb cyclone is passed or bomb cyclone season has passed. That's a great question. Thank you for sharing that, Judy. And I guess I am just terrible at guessing what is going on within a hive that has been either mites or been starved out, but I'm working on it. I'm definitely going to get better about diagnosing my own troubles. I think I'll probably remove my wraps mid-March when I start seeing if I start seeing dandelions, that's kind of an indication for me to take off the wraps because I know that the bees can withstand those drops in temperature other times of the year, but knowing that there is a nectar and pollen source out there, removing the wraps gives me a little bit more, or knowing that there is that nectar out there and removing the wraps, I feel better about that practice. So.
Folks, anybody else have any suggestions on wrap removal or diagnosing dead outs? I don't know if you guys have had any experience with that, but I strongly encourage you guys to take photos and even send us some photos. I'd love to take a look and see how these dead outs are looking. I think it's a really missed practice of ours in the industry. We very quickly clean up the mess in the yard and want to start the new season and get the fresh bees in. But I think we missed the opportunity of assessing what happened in the fall and why some of them are living and some aren't. And if we can just figure out whether it's mites or food or it's a little bit of both, I think we can supplement with our management and our operation styles. And maybe it's dealing with it in the early fall, and that takes care of some of our winter losses.
I also think that something we didn't touch on is air circulation and chilling of the bees with the condensation in the hive. Something that I experienced early on with the sudden drop in temperatures when I went to look at, I had a dead out hive. I didn't have any of those little satellite frames of bees that you had talked about. I just had the main cluster, and then I had, they were frozen. They had frost on them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it was, they had frosted and they already kind of started to decay in the mold. And it was just one cluster. I didn't have a lot of dead bees underneath. It was just that the frozen bees that were underneath a uninsulated inner cover, which I think for us here in Nebraska is something to implement into our practice, is having that insulation between our telescoping cover and our inner cover, is to put that insulation that would draw up and pull that moisture away from the hive. Having the circulation of air properly distributed throughout the hive so that they can keep it from raining that cold, chilled water back down on them.
I think your area also gets kind of the cold morning fog, like it doesn't it? Because I think moisture is a problem for some areas, definitely, especially if you see signs of wetness on the wood or mold growing on the wood. That's a really clear indication you're getting too much moisture. Yeah. Luckily, we don't have too much of a moisture issue in our area. Moisture boards,
question from Mike. Thank you, Mike Cross. Can you have a swarm late fall or early winter? One of my hives was active in early winter, then checking last week, almost all empty of bees. Just a few dead ones, plenty of honey, or were they all robber bees?
It's possible. I mean, if you're in the Midwest and you're supposed to have a normal winter, you know, you typically aren't supposed to have swarming in these type of off seasons, but we do get situations where, especially the late fall season swarms, where maybe the colony just gets too crowded too late and it'll try to swarm off. Or in other circumstances, if there's something not supportive of the hive or the environment, they'll abscond, which means they'll leave the hive just because it's not, maybe it's too wet, maybe they're not getting enough thermal regulation, or their food stores are tainted, or for whatever reason. Sometimes bees will take off and just try to find a different home. But that will normally be the majority of the bees, including the queen. I don't know, Megan, do you have other additional comments?
I've had absconding in the late fall due to mite bombs, where my treatment was not successful, and my bees left because of the mite load. And I've had that where one hive goes and then the hive next to it goes, and that goes. To help prevent that, I have spread my apiary out more. So there's more distance between my hives to prevent the drifting. Also, the types of bees I keep, some Italian bees are known to drift between hives. So keeping everybody at more of a distance, instead of lining up my hives back, down a row, I put them in more of a circular pattern, so that helps with that, preventing the drift between hives. But I have seen hives pretty active in late October and November, where I think, well, it looks like they're getting that, there's enough bees outside of the hive. It looks like a swarm is forming. Just kind of crossing my fingers that they don't, but it's not uncommon when you have such warm weather that there is no indication for the queen to stop laying, and the weather's warm enough that they think that they can. So some really good questions here, comments in the chat. Where can we send pics of our dead out? We have had one hive die and all the dead bees at the bottom board. Absolutely none of the frames, tons of honey left over. So would you like, Judy, would you like them to send your dead bee out pictures to UNL?
I did include the UNLV Labs email underneath there at the bottom.
Thank you, Luke. Yes. I have a strategy from Ben Phillips for removing wraps is to reduce down one box at the same time. You don't want to do it if you have brood in both boxes, but it helps temperature regulation. That's good. Thank you, Ben. Is to reducing the amount of space that the bees need to regulate the temperature along with the outside temperature. That's a good idea. Really good. And then Michael asks, at what appropriate temps trigger the queen to begin laying? Or is it based on the amount of sunlight?
Great question. That is an interesting one because in the hive, it's thermoregulated to a constant temperature and there's very little sunlight. So how does she get that cue? I think it's dietary, but because the worker's bringing it in, but let me look into it and see if we have any information. Yeah, for a lot of insects, it is photoperiod. For a lot of insects, there's a circadian rhythm that is like instinctual, that they have this kind of trigger or instinct of when they need to lay or when they need to reproduce or go into overwintering. It's a little different for bees, honeybees in particular, because we've been breeding them so highly to brood, especially the Italians and the Carniolans that we get from California and southern states. They're bred to do a lot more. So I don't know how tied they are to some of the environmental cues as say something like a Russian bees, you know, that are typically more cued into changes into the environment and seasonal changes. Mm-hmm. I'll look into that and we'll get back to you next time. Good question. Sorry, I've got kids screaming in the background, getting ready for bedtime. We do have 2 minutes left. Are there any other additional questions or requests? We often will, next month, we'll find another guest host to kind of lead the session, and Randall and I will also be there to kind of, you know, provide some support and extra, some extra considerations and maybe key thoughts that we, coming up in March, we'll probably start focusing on more of the spring maintenance, you know, getting the bees ready, getting your equipment ready, and getting prepared for your packages and your nukes.
Yeah. Thank you, Judy. I will recommend everybody to check out the UNL Bee Lab website, as well as the Nebraska Beekeepers website for events, upcoming open apiaries. The Great Plains Master Beekeeper Program is, we're going full steam into hosting open apiaries across the state of Nebraska, and testing for journeyman to master beekeeper and apprentice to journeyman beekeeper certification. So if you are interested in that, please check back with the GPMB. Please, it is free for the GPMB to become a member, where you would get information on those upcoming testing dates. And also the Nebraska Beekeepers Association, we are preparing for our spring events, and we are in search of volunteers for the state fair coming up this year. I know that's kind of like 8 months away, but if you are available, we'd love to see you and have you at our bee culture booth. And we are also trying to nail down a date for our in-person Bee Fun Day. So check back with those programs, and we look forward to seeing you and getting your questions for next month's Hap-Bee Hour, and hope you all have a successful and warm spring with your bees, and we will check back with you again.